So we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Soneson. I'm the director of the Language Center at the University of Minnesota. And welcome to another event hosted by the Language Collaboratory. We're a partnership for the advancement of the intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional development opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature. Our series this spring aims at furthering conversations that help uncover the complexities of striking a balance on professional, academic, and personal goals to achieve the well-being of instructors and students of languages. We address this issue through the lens of our current shared circumstances, approaching it from a variety of perspectives, building on the experiences and expertise of individuals on our own campuses. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging the institutional distance and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You're invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. The sessions will be recorded and made available through each institution's website. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat, and during the open discussion to raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Our next event will be held 1 week from Thursday on March 4th at this time, hosted by the University of Iowa, and discussing meaningful communication inside and outside the classroom. Today, we are hosting the session at the University of Minnesota, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Dan Nolan, Assistant Professor of German Studies at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. Dan teaches in the German Studies program there, and his work in literary criticism is concentrated on gestures of truthfulness in German and Russian literature of the 18th and 19th centuries. He helped found the Mobile Language Learning Group and is working to facilitate collaborative online international learning development for the University of Minnesota system. That's a key word, collaborative online international learning. Dan, can you tell us what that is?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share some slides in response to your questions. I think the screen sharing got shut off, though. Can you turn that back on, Dan?
Yeah,
I think I got it again.
Yeah.
All right. I think you can see my slide now. So yeah, I'm going to start off talking about what collaborative online international learning is. And in this brief presentation, I'm going to focus on collaborative online international learning, but there are multiple kinds of virtual exchange out there. And we tend to use that term now to refer to this largest group of kinds of activities where you're learning together online, which today is referred to as virtual exchange. But the word telecollaboration means roughly the same thing. And there's a lot of words out there to refer to this kind of practice. So I want to differentiate early on and clear away some of the confusion that can come from that. Telecollaboration and virtual exchange are largely synonymous, but the history of the use of these words is a little different. And that's important for us as language learning instructors, because telecollaboration really is the word that was associated with language learning earlier on. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, virtual exchange is where people do learning online, and there's many different forms. CELIA is one kind of project where you have facilitated discussions. Students from different parts of the world get together with a facilitator to lead a discussion. That often happens outside of a course, parallel to a course. Teletandem, e-tandem is another kind of virtual exchange where students are often paired off one-on-one to do some language exchange, for instance. And COIL is distinct in that it really focuses on collaborative online international learning, or class-to-class collaboration, where you have overlapping syllabuses, and that's what's hopefully captured here in this slide. So I'm going to talk about COIL because I think there's some distinct advantages. But of course, when you're coming up with a project for your class, it's helpful to consider all of these different varieties of virtual exchange. So again, what is COIL? Like I said, COIL is a kind of virtual exchange where the focus is on co-development, where faculty work together, faculty from different parts of the world work together because they both recognize there's a valuable kind of learning that occurs when students from different parts of the world work together on a common area of focus. COIL projects, what do they look like? They're often project-based. They can have many different forms. They can vary in length and format from semester long to multiple weeks, synchronous or asynchronous, for instance. They are often involve a preparation for a collaboration where students work together as peers, complete a project, and then maybe evaluate that project together or separately. Some COIL courses also involve face-to-face in-person meetings. Many do not, of course. So also there's some key themes that emerge from this body of work that's building up around COIL. I want to note a couple of those because it helps us get a clear sense of what COIL is and what's being done today. Peer-to-peer engagement in COIL is really privileged for many reasons. Primarily, I think, though, because the learning potential that those activities have is transformative. We see something transformative happening in students when they engage with their peers. And this happens across many different fields, not just language learning, right? So these are the benefits of COIL more generally before I turn to language learning. Also, over the past 20 years, we've had a lot of experience in this kind of virtual exchange, and we see that there's a tendency to forget that making mistakes is okay. When you go abroad, when faculty lead study abroad programs, all kinds of things go wrong, from train schedules getting changed to a coup or a strike, and those changes, disruptions, are often seen as learning opportunities, and we don't see that as readily in virtual exchange, and it's worth asking why, right? Why can't we work with our partners abroad when we have so many tools that allow us access now? Also, another theme, we focus on equitable engagement in COIL. That's part of the C in COIL, and that can be difficult because there are many differences between our academic cultures, and faculty quickly see that those difficulties coming, and they shy away from COIL projects maybe because they see them. So in COIL work, we often say that it's valuable to focus on equity instead of equal, right? Partners from different parts of the world are not going to provide the same activity in a COIL project, but they can provide an equitable, a comparable kind of input that is really balancing for the project. And that helps keep many of the distractions and hurdles out of the way that can really derail these projects. Also, very briefly, what are the big benefits of COIL? Again, before turning to language learning, they promise an increased capacity for intercultural learning. That's really something we see across the board in these kinds of projects. And that also comes with an increased awareness of the complexities of one's own cultural context that we know is the basis for intercultural learning. We see opportunities for comparative analysis of governmental structures, economic structures, and so on. There's a strong history in telecollaboration of in social work and in international social development, which is especially important for global crises like climate change. And there's also opportunities, you'll see opportunities for students to work together in global teams. And we know that the market is thirsty for students that have those skills. And we really prepare students with those, provide students with those skills in our programs, but it's often not highlighted in the way that you can through a COIL project. So I don't know if you want to ask the question, Dan, or if I should.
You've got it on your slide. It looks good.
On the slide. I'm going to go ahead and read it myself. We prepared questions beforehand. And one of the key questions here, right, is how does this kind of work benefit language learners and language learning courses? And there, the first thing to note is, as I mentioned already, telecollaboration has a deep history in language learning. The earliest practitioners and really the early development of this field was driven by language pedagogy. And I'm just going to note, Miriam Haug has a piece from 2008 that summarizes some of this. There's a lot of literature now. Recent book by Dooley, Owenby, and O'Dowd called In This Together summarizes some of that research if you want to look at that. I'm going to give a link to that book at the end of this, in part because it's free to download. and really accessible. I'm also going to give a quote from it, as I mentioned. So COIL and telecollaboration in general brings a lot of benefits to language learning classes. Just to summarize, it allows students to interact with speakers in the target language and speakers of the target language. This often means that we need to scaffold or accommodate different levels of language ability, right? And we can get into that maybe in the questions because we don't have too much time. Most COIL modules are project-based, and they offer opportunities for situated learning, which is really beneficial. These projects allow instructors to create an international learning community, a community of learning that brings together peers, international peers. And that's really valuable. Students get active use of the language, and they're negotiating meaning making across those cultures. And I think many people will readily perceive the value there. So this is a quote from the book I mentioned that I think is illustrative here in answering our next question, which is, how can recent developments in COIL and virtual exchange really benefit language programs? First of all, there's just this huge expansion. Dooley Owenby and Robert O'Dowd note in the beginning chapter of that book, for many of us who have been involved in telecollaboration for some time now, it would have been difficult to predict how rapidly interest in telecollaborative language teaching and learning would rise in popularity around the world in the past few years. This is from 2018. Just 10 years ago, it was difficult to find any mention of telecollaboration in journals, books, or even online, with the exception of a few highly specialized sections of academic conferences and publications, right? So he's referring there to mostly to computer-assisted language learning. So what does that mean? Telecollaborative projects focused on language learning have clearly benefited from the rapid expansion of non-language learning focused online international learning projects, or COIL generally. It's not hard, I think, to understand why. There's been an emergence of vast networks of partners that we can now access to create programs and projects. There's funding for these projects, some of which are quite expansive, like the Erasmus Virtual Exchange in Europe that ran over the past several years. The Stevens Initiative provides funding in the US, and that support has been much needed. The IT staff at institutions across the US, across the globe, and administrators are seeing the clear advantages in the innovative use of technology we see in these projects and the increased international engagement that comes with them. And all of these factors are crucial to the successful development of a COIL project. But back when it was just language learners doing this kind of stuff, that infrastructure wasn't there. So that's, I think, one of the big things that's worth noting now. To get to one of our key questions in this series, I also want to just note again how thankful I am to Dan, to Adolfo, for organizing this and to be able to speak with the Language Collaboratory. I'm really thankful for this project in general. But one of the key questions in the series here is kind of dealing with the fatigue and burnout and just endless complications that have come at us through the pandemic. And to be sure, Zoom fatigue is not good for COIL development. When I go and ask faculty if they don't want to do another project that is entirely focused on Zoom, you can imagine when people's eyes roll. We have fatigue, we have workload imbalances. There's a general spirit in many ways of kind of overwintering this pandemic and laying low. So taking on new projects is hard. But I think there are some advantages here, especially for language learners who are already trained in developing curriculum that augments intercultural awareness, right? We already have the skills that are required to run these kinds of projects, and language learning already is clearly benefiting from these kinds of projects. In addition to that, when we use our Zoom session to engage with folks abroad, we're using Zoom in kind of the way it was meant to be used. When you meet with your students who are just a few houses away from you over Zoom because you can't be in the same room with them, that doesn't feel great. But when you meet with someone from the other side of the globe, you bring excitement into your classes, and it re-enlivens your courses. So we can counteract the Zoom fatigue with international engagement through COIL projects and bring the promise of distance learning back into the remote classroom to some extent at least, right? So there's also a mutual benefit here. All of the online language learning skills that you acquired over the last year, they're really well suited for developing a COIL project. So we kind of inadvertently, unintentionally, all became experts in online learning. And now we have that skill. And that's great for this really promising new field that was expanding well before the pandemic and will continue to expand after it. COIL clearly also offers a benefit in a year in which almost no study abroad is happening, right? So COIL can supplant, augment, and replace lacking study abroad, but in terms of equity and providing for students that don't have access to study abroad, COIL is crucial, right? So we know we want to expand international experiences at our campuses, and COIL is going to allow us to do that in a way that study abroad, unfortunately, is just not going to be able to do in any near term. So I'm going to try and keep to time here. A couple notes on best practices and how telecollaboration can really be supported. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but we know that when faculty are engaged, that these projects roll out well. Healthy relationships are the key to good COIL development. And we have improved assessment tools and techniques for really locking down, looking at that intercultural learning. There's also, I think, it helps if you're thinking of developing a COIL program or a COIL course. It helps to look at that spectrum of engagement because it's really the key. Faculty are what make these programs happen, and each faculty member has to start somewhere, but then can build towards that broader engagement and collaboration across their campus, not just with international partners, but really engaging that support structure that's on their local institution. So doing a COIL course, but then closing the loop and going back to your local community, and then maybe taking on a leadership role or even a sustained leadership role. That can be really crucial. I also just want to note, as these larger programs develop across the country, we're starting to see some really valuable lessons learned. One, working with international partners works best when it happens through your institution. So providing those international partnership activities at a campus and system level can be really valuable. And there needs to be an ecosystem of support. Faculty see the light in their students' eyes when they do these projects, but they often feel that they're not recognized and they're not rewarded for putting in the effort. And so institutions and campuses need to correct that. And that's solid advice that's backed up by research. For instance, Franziska Helm's excellent piece from 2015 that points this out in hundreds of COIL projects in Europe. I'm going to wrap up here. There are several other suggestions of how you can really keep a sustainable COIL development going on your campus. I can get into that in the questions, but otherwise I will post this in the chat window, just a couple links, and then I think, Dan, we should move on to questions, right?
Yep. If you don't mind, I'll start out.
Okay.
Just briefly, thank you so much. You predicted every question that I had up till now, which is great. And thanks for sharing this with us. COIL has been around now for about 10, 12 years, something like that, right?
Yeah, maybe depending on how you date it, it goes back like to 2002. There's a big uptick in 2006. There's an important book that comes out. But yeah, roughly.
And this is basically an organization that you participate in, or is this just something that has a kind of a method?
Great question. It's really a method, right? So the word COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, really becomes popular around the SUNY COIL Center, which starts in 2000 and in 2002, and then expands into a system-wide project pretty rapidly. There are virtual exchange projects in other institutions. Some institutions use the term COIL, some don't. Right now, if you look at state institutions across the US, COIL is the most popular term used for this kind of collaborative project-based course-to-course collaboration that I noted. But some institutions, they already were using the acronym COIL. For instance, Penn State uses the acronym EDGE because COIL was already being used. So there's a bit of lack of clarity on what acronym is going to be used in the future, but it's a method.
Is there a group or any kind of a resource that helps you find collaborative partners?
That's a great question, right? So how do you find partners? How do you help your faculty find partners? I currently run COIL cohorts for the University of Minnesota Duluth campus right now, and I've been doing it for the system as well. And I provide a partnership development process. And so I've tried to answer this question, but everyone I talk to at other institutions has come up with their own answer. So I would love to hear suggestions. What I have done is I start with institutional partnerships, and then we look at those broader networks. So there is an Aurora network. There is Uni Collaboration. So if you just type into Google Uni Collaboration, that's the biggest project in Europe that was really a big part of the Erasmus virtual exchange. They have a partnering part of their website where you can go and search for partners. There are private organizations that are attempting to provide partnership opportunities like Class to Class, and I can put that in the link.
Here's a question. I used to teach Japanese on satellite to US high schools. My partner in Japan was also a teacher on the SIR-C project. How can I encourage him to let the students create projects and not have him act as a director? And he also taught on television in Georgia. Any advice?
How can I encourage him to let students create projects and not him act? So, right, there's I guess I'll say this. What I recommend when faculty start projects is that they first sit down with their collaborator and they look at the learning goals of their course. And they look at the area where there's an overlap between their learning goals and their partner's learning goals. And it doesn't have to be the same learning goal. We can learn different things from each other in one project. But that's where co-development starts, is by having an open ear to your partner and not saying, here's this amazing project. I come from this institution that has all these resources. We're going to do this. You're invited to be part of it. That often leads to problems. And there's just so many problems that emerge in virtual exchange that we just try and get ahead of them by establishing that balance early on. And maybe a similar piece of advice would fit here. When students are working together and co-creating a project, all of the many difficulties that are going to emerge become surmountable, hopefully. And so that I guess that would be my way of addressing that. If students are really working together and co-creating knowledge and skills, then the project tends to work better.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, our theme here is striking a balance, and here's another kind of area where we can balance things out. That is to say, ensuring that students and faculty on both sides of the exchange are getting something out of it, and that they're working together toward shared goals. So another question I have, and COIL is often talked about in the context of languages across the curriculum. Would you say that there is a connection there, or are they totally different sorts of projects?
I would love to see some research on this. If someone has a comment here, I would love to hear it. Oftentimes we talk about COIL as benefiting the relationship a language program has with other disciplines on campus, because COIL projects are often run without any focus on language learning. But lo and behold, when faculty and students get involved in the project, they realize that English isn't cutting it, that they need to understand more of what their partners are saying among each other. And even though it might not be an immersive language learning experience, they're learning some of that language. They're exposed to it. So it highlights the need for language learning, I'll say that. Whether or not there's really a clear pathway from COIL projects to increased enrollment in language programs. I don't have data on that. I don't think, I'd be surprised if there was clear data, but I'd love to know if someone has a comment.
Could you point to or kind of give us a concrete example of a project or two that you've been involved with in Duluth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been involved in many projects, and I've been able to facilitate many projects. I'm currently working with a faculty member in business strategy, and this is quite far afield from language learning, but they're looking at the global supply chain and the way in which contracts are interpreted. We write contracts in global supply chains, and they get handed off to each member, but the ways in which those contracts are interpreted and what it means to fulfill the very language in the contract, of course, leads to all kinds of difficulties. And you can quickly see this is also a linguistic issue. So the very question of efficiency in global supply chains brings us back to intercultural questions and really also linguistic questions. And so I think that's an illustrative example. I have been involved in a project with German partners focused on sustainability for several years now. I'm in a German studies program. That's my area of focus. And we've also had many of our faculty work with partners in Mexico. The University of Minnesota Duluth was able to be part of the US-Mexico COIL exchange project, where 17 universities partnered with universities across Mexico in a host of different fields. So those are a couple examples worth noting.
So how would a project in sustainability like that you might have conducted, what kind of projects would students do together?
There are many things you can do. You could start off simply by looking at media advertisement related to sustainability projects. And my project is quite extensive, but I'll try and summarize it quickly. I have students reach out to local organizations involved in sustainable development in Duluth, and then take a question from a local organization and then go to our partners in Germany and find a similar organization that's working on a similar area. And then they investigate that organization. The students in Germany do the opposite. They start in Germany, and then they find through us local organizations here in the Duluth area. Then we write a research project together, and then we take the results. And this is, I think, one of the most fascinating things about COIL and virtual exchange, is you can go back to those international partners and you bring them in, you close the loop, and you bring them to the final research presentation, and you're really able to ask students, what did you bring across that intercultural divide? You asked a question, you went abroad, you learned with partners, and then you tried to provide an answer that wasn't just, we should have more solar energy, but rather, how do you work with a community to get stuff done under different economic, governmental, and environmental conditions? And that translation is challenging, but students get it done, and it's really impressive, and it's wonderful to see that connection being built.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Has anybody also experimented with this? Philomena, you've said that this is your passion. Do you have anything to add or any comments? I don't mean to pick on you. Anybody else might.
Yeah, if someone else has a question to be answered, I'd offer the floor to questions from this group.
Sorry, I wasn't from the beginning of the discussion, and I'm trying to get into things. How old are the students we're talking about?
Great question. So students, the first I'd say virtual exchange is a method and a practice that happens across many different age groups. So if you look at CELIA, that's often high school students. The COIL work, that's sort of the focus that I'm focusing on here, that's often undergraduates and graduate programs. But I think the majority are in their undergraduate programs. Of course, the age can vary, but in the US, right, it's 18 to 25, I think, on average.
So we're not talking about younger ones. Let's say students who are about 17 or 18 years old.
Well, there are COIL projects that are run through high schools. Absolutely, yes.
So high school students can be included too.
Absolutely, and sometimes you'll have high school students working together with university students. There's nothing that prevents you from bringing in high schools. You know, especially if you're looking at language learning, the question is not really how old the person is, but where is their level of where is their aptitude level, and what can they benefit from an exchange. So if you have students that are in an intermediate course, then oftentimes language students in a high school might be more advanced than an intermediate classroom at a university. So I think the overarching suggestion is helpful here to kind of look at the learning goals of your course, find that international partner that's interested, and then ask each other, where can we collaborate? Where is there an opportunity to do a project together where our students are going to benefit from that engagement, which is just rich and many-sided.
So this doesn't, sorry, so this doesn't need to be a particular semester-long project or course that you're sharing with another institution. It may just be a project that belongs to or is a component of a course that you're involved with, right?
That's right. So COIL focuses on class-to-class and course-to-course collaboration, but that doesn't mean the whole course is a collaboration. Some courses do that. Often it's impossible because semesters don't overlap that much. Also, it's a lot of work to put together, say, a 15-week collaboration. So when I'm talking with faculty, I often recommend that they start off with a 2 or 4 or 6 week collaboration. And even if you were to just do a few meetings, that can be valuable in your course. There's no reason not to do it. The issue, one of the reasons we recommend 4 weeks is because there is a lot of buildup. You need to engage with this person. You can't go in blind. You need to get to know their students. You need to know whether or not they're at an institution where frontal education is just the norm. And so if you're going to ask them to go into breakout groups and they're going to look at you like you're crazy, you need to know that. So there needs to be some prep work. And if you're going to do the prep work, then the benefit, you want to extend that benefit. And that's why we recommend 2, 4, 6 weeks for an initial project.
Thanks. Dan, do you want to put your contact information up again, or just maybe put your email in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to speak to folks if they're interested. That's my email. And I'll also put the website. And if you go to this website, one of the things you'll find, this is the COIL website of the University of Minnesota Duluth. One of the things you'll find linked there, if you go to the resources page, is a workbook. And there's a workbook that's about 30-something pages long, and it just takes you through the steps of developing a COIL project and all those pieces of very likely good advice. No one really knows exactly what the best practice is here, but there's a workbook, and I just want to note that was developed at the College of Education and Human Development on the Twin Cities campus by several people, including Traden Wagner, Melissa Faldin, and Thomas Nekodomu, who are some instructional designers that I really value and am really thankful for their input on that. And it's free to distribute, Creative Commons license. You can take it, copy it, change it, do whatever you want with it.
Well, thank you very much. The official part of the session is through now. We're at time. We don't want to keep people longer than we've promised, but we will be sticking around for another 10 minutes or so. If you want to continue the conversation, if you need to go, we understand. And thank you all for coming. We will be sending you an evaluation survey. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, that would be absolutely terrific. Thanks all for coming. And like I say, we'll stick around if you want to talk somewhere.